Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 10 of season 5 of Lore Decks, which is also the series' final episode. And it had a lot of fun moments, and there was nothing that annoyed me about it, but also I think I expected more. I thought there would be more epic stuff happening, especially since they had the perfect setup to do whatever crazy stuff they can come up with. And yet they didn't really do that much with it, with that whole dimensional rift, which is affecting our reality and transforming people and ships to their variants from the multiverse. And so they did have some fun with it, and there are some moments which I loved, but it could have been so much more. Especially, I think the missed opportunity was not to finally explain that shot in the opening credit sequence with the Borg fighting everyone, and the whale probe and the crystalline entity and V'ger and everyone are there in that one shot, and it was never explained in the show itself. So I thought maybe finally in the last episode with that whole dimensional rift thing, maybe they'll finally explain that part somewhere in the episode, and yet they didn't. And there was a whole bunch of Klingons in this episode, and I like how they do the Klingons. They do them correctly. They are the TNG Klingons, but they've been doing it so much in the show that frankly it's kind of becoming old. Like I would rather they play with things that were not played with as much, or maybe brand new things that will be more fun, I think. And that maybe describes this whole show, which for the most part I really enjoyed it, and most of the references were spot on and correct and funny, but it also missed the opportunity to actually do new stories and new things. And as a cartoon, they could have done whatever they wanted. They are limited only by their imagination, so they could have done either actual sequels to ideas from the previous shows and not just references, or maybe brand new stories. It was a little bit disappointing at times when they seemed to be setting up something epic and then just made some silly joke and not really anything that interesting. And so a lot of times I felt a bit disappointed by the show, and that's why I'm not really sad it's ending. Maybe it will make room for a new Star Trek show that will actually do some new things and not just make callbacks and references and homages. Even if they did it in a very fun way for the most part in the show, it's not really enough to be an amazing show on their own. You cannot just rely on member berries and references, even if they are done in a very good way and a funny way, and I did enjoy most of it, but I think it could have been much more. So this episode begins with the dimensional rift opening, and as we learned in the previous episode, it's not made by any big villains. There are no big villains in this season. It was just made by accident by a starship from another reality, which was exploring other realities, and it accidentally caused some chain reaction or something that might destroy our whole universe. And we see a bunch of Klingon ships approaching it, and that really reminded me of that scene with V'ger when it destroyed a bunch of Klingon ships, and also in Star Trek 2009. And that's what I mean when I say that watching the show often feels as if I'm watching the same things over and over again. So it's like watching the same scenes we saw in other shows. One moment I really loved was when they showed the effects of this rift on the Klingon ships, that some of them got transformed into variants of them from the multiverse, I guess. And then we see one of the Klingons being transformed into the Star Trek Discovery Klingork. And that part was really funny to me. It's like they finally admitting that Discovery is all set in another reality, a different timeline where the Klingons are different. So it's sort of like an admission, even though they didn't directly came out and said it, but that's kind of implied that the rift is causing changes to ships and people based on things from the multiverse, from other realities. So that basically proves that the Discovery Klingorks are from a different reality. And later on in the episode, we see a different Klingon ship also transforming, and everyone turns into those Klingon mutants, the same ones that we once saw Worf transform into, which I guess is a proto-Klingon. It's like a more ancient version of the Klingons. So maybe in a different reality, all Klingons look like that. And so I guess technically we can use that to say that they're not saying that the Discovery was all in a different timeline, that maybe simply these kinds of Klingons are simply an earlier stage of the Klingons from a century or two ago, that some of the Klingons did look like that in our reality, just like the Proto-Klingons did exist in our reality as well. That's what Worf turned into in the TNG episode Genesis. So technically we can say that it doesn't prove the Discovery is in a different timeline, but it kind of implies it heavily, that in a different timeline all Klingons look like that, and that's why that one Klingon was transformed and looked kind of horrified. And anyway, we look at it, I think it's hilarious. I think that's probably my favorite moment of this episode, because it's poking fun of Discovery's Klingons. And then we see the Cerritos again, and we see some guy wearing glasses, and that's something that always annoys me when I see it in Star Trek, because in the far future with more advanced medical technology, you would think anyone can be cured from having to wear glasses. I know there was a scene in Star Trek 2 when Kirk said he's allergic to the treatment, and that's why he had to wear glasses, so maybe other people are also allergic. But honestly, I think it's silly. Even in that movie, it was kind of silly, but if it's a really rare condition, maybe that's okay. But now we see it more and more. We saw that guy in Discovery, played by Cronenberg, and that will be totally fine if they simply said these are not just glasses, but it's actually some kind of high-tech equipment. Just like in that episode of Deep Space Nine when they went to a Jem'Hadar ship and it had that equipment that you can wear and it puts like a screen inside your brain or something. So if they said it's something like that, then that would be totally okay. And yet they never do, and so that always annoys me when they show people in glasses in the far future. So then Boimler gets that transmission from his other self from the other dimension, which we saw in the previous episode, and then they inform Starfleet of the danger, and then they say that the Cerritos should handle it on itself. And that was really kind of strange. And they said something, it's because of Boimler's connection with his other self or something, and yet they never really did anything with that in the rest of the episode. So it was never really explained why it had to be the Cerritos. And also they teased us with the Enterprise. They said the Enterprise is on its way as well. So I thought maybe in the end of the episode we'll see the Enterprise E again. Maybe we'll finally get to know what happened with it. You know, it was said in Season 3 of Picard that Worf was capturing it at some point and somehow caused it to be lost. And so I immediately thought we were going to see Michael Dorn return as Worf, as the captain of the Enterprise E, and we're going to see what happened or whatever, and yet it never happened, and so that was just a cop-out. Why did they mention the Enterprise and then never showed it later? So that was annoying. And then they explained that they have to get closer to the rift to close it, but the rift is surrounded by a Schrödinger possibility field, which completely remaps matter. So if you enter it without protection, it will transform you into some kind of variant of yourself from a different reality. And they show an animation of a Klingon transforming into a Klingon Salamandra, which is yet another reference to the Voyager episode The Threshold, which they already poked fun at many times on the show. And they show the human transforming into a cactus head and the Vulcan transforming into a Yoda-looking creature. And I wish we would have actually seen stuff like that in the episode. That's what I was expecting, that we'll see a whole bunch of crazy stuff happening. And then Starfleet says that they are sending them away to update their shields to protect them from this effect, so it will not happen. And I keep thinking, but that's a missed opportunity, then what's the whole point of this episode, if not to play with a lot of crazy stuff? But later they say that the shields are not totally effective, and it will be affecting the whole of the ship, but not the people. Because the hull is made of duranium, and duranium will somehow be affected by these changes, but not the people inside the ship. And across the episode, they show the Cerritos transforming into other models of ships, and yet the crew are totally fine with these changes. And that doesn't really make any sense, because the size of the ship keeps changing, parts of the hull keep disappearing or appearing, and so how exactly does it not affect the people inside? Shouldn't some of them be flying out into space or getting stuck inside walls or something? And yet everyone were totally fine. So I guess the phenomenon is also somehow moving the people inside the ship around so that they wouldn't get stuck into the walls or fly outside. Somehow it's protecting them. So it kind of felt a little bit silly that they didn't really think this through. I mean, when they showed one of the Klingon ships transforming into an ancient barge, it did show that the Klingons were flying off into space because part of their hull was now exposed and open. So how come nothing like that ever happened with the Cerritos? I guess it was always closed, but how come some of the crew didn't get stuck into walls which were not in the same place anymore? So that felt a little bit illogical. Or if at least they had some kind of technobabble excuse for why the crew are protected. If they said that they programmed the transporters to relocate the crew into livable areas of the ship so that they wouldn't be harmed, some kind of quick excuse like that would have made it okay. But the way they showed it was kind of illogical. And speaking of illogic, we also see Tallinn and Tandy kind of arguing about how they should handle the situation. And that's something I mentioned previously in that episode when they were both promoted to the same position of chief science officer. And I said, wouldn't that cause problems? Like they don't have a chain of command anymore. So wouldn't that cause arguments? And that's exactly what we see here. And then later in the episode, they suddenly settle their differences and suddenly they cooperate and they make like a funny moment of it that suddenly they're science besties and they press the button at the same time and suddenly they're collaborating. So it was funny, but it doesn't really make any sense still. And also in the very end of the episode, when both Boimler and Mariner are promoted to first officer, so they will basically be doing the same job and competing for whoever will be the final one. So again, it's the same kind of attitude that everyone gets a golden medal, that it's all a democracy, that it's not a chain of command. That's something I complained about previously. In all the new Star Trek shows, they do that kind of thing. And so anyway, the Cerritos keeps transforming into other ships, and there was also a funny joke that the Klingon ships are almost not transforming into any other version, and then the doc said that it's because the Klingons so rarely update their ship designs. They always want their ships to look like big stupid birds, and so that was also funny. And also in this episode we see those two blood wine brothers coming back and battling some other evil Klingon woman, and then they get to the Cerritos, and honestly all those parts were kind of pointless and not really that interesting or funny. I did like that part when Ransom grabbed the Klingon's arm and proved that he's stronger than him. That was kind of funny since across the whole series we saw how obsessed Ransom is with physical fitness, and so it's funny that the Klingon was even surprised that this puny human is stronger than him. Also we have a moment with that character that I forgot her name. She was introduced in one of the previous episodes as a descendant of that species of gods that we saw in one episode of TOS. So she's the granddaughter of Zeus or something like that, and she uses her lightning powers to disable the shields of the Klingon ship, and that was basically her whole contribution. And after the Klingons lose their shields, they are getting transformed into those proto-Klingons that we once saw Worf transform into in the episode Genesis. And then the little Klingon dog that Klingon woman had also gets transformed into what looks like that starship from the movie Flight of the Navigator for some reason, or maybe it's just a shell. Then the Cerritos gets transformed into a Sovereign class, and even the bridge looks the same as on the Enterprise E, but as I said, it doesn't really make sense how it doesn't affect any of the characters. How come no one gets stuck inside the wall or the floor or the station? Like how come all the people get moved around without being affected in any way? So it was an opportunity to maybe do some gory, nasty scenes, which they can simply fix with advanced medical technology or with the transporter or whatever. So they could have used an excuse to say how no one got killed, but at least acknowledge that logical problem of the people moving around inside the constantly changing ship. We also had the scenes with Rappaport having trouble with his implants again, and then at some point in the episode he decides to remove it. Also, as they get closer to the rift, the ship gets split into two versions of itself, which kind of reminds me of an episode of Voyager. But aside from the cool visual effect, it doesn't really have any real meaning or purpose here. And then they discover they cannot completely seal that rift, but they can somehow contain it and make it stable. And then in the end, it becomes like a permanent wormhole into other dimensions. Then the rest of Starfleet arrives, and I think we do see what might be the Enterprise E, but we don't really get any close-ups of it. We don't get any characters from it, and so that previous mention of the Enterprise was just teasing us without any payoff. And they say that since the rift is now a permanently open portal, Starfleet will want to explore it, and they'll be putting a space station right next to it, and for some reason, some technobubble, they have to use an older station that will not be affected by some radiation or something, and so they pull Starbase 80 to the mouth of this new portal, and so it immediately reminds me of the Deep Space Nine scenario of an older, more primitive space station guarding the mouth of the wormhole to explore it. And we also get to see that Defiant class ship from the previous episode coming through and joining this mission. And we once again see that crew of variants of different characters from Star Trek, like T'Pol and Lily and Ensign Kim, and the Bashir and Garrick couple, which I saw a lot of people complaining about online, but as I said, I don't really have a problem with it because it's not really our Garrick and Bashir, so it's not really a continuity issue. I saw a lot of people complaining that Bashir was always straight, he was always chasing every woman he sees across 7 seasons of DS9, he was always chasing Jazia Dax and other women, and this is once again woke stuff, and so I saw a lot of complaints, but again, these are not our Garrick and Bashir, and technically this Bashir is not even human, he's a hologram, so maybe Garrick programmed him to be that way to fit himself, so it's not really a continuity problem, and because it's kind of a reference to all kinds of fan theories about that kind of thing, since, in the first scene that Garrick met Bashir, he kind of touched his shoulder and kind of smiled at him in a creepy way, and Bashir got scared by that. And so, because of all those kinds of moments, and because of the fan theories throughout the years, and even the actors talking about it, because of that, I actually found that funny, and so I don't actually have any problem with that. Because it's not technically even the same characters. So it's not really changing the real characters into a different orientation and all of that. So anyway, Captain Freeman is given command of Starbase 80 and she will be overseeing the mission to explore the multiverse. And Ransom is promoted to be captain of the Cerritos in her stead. And I think it was a missed opportunity. Maybe he should have been the one to be given the assignment to explore the multiverse, since isn't he being voiced by the same actor who was the lead of the show Sliders, which was all about jumping through portals to other realities? So I think it would have been ironic and like a funny reference or an inside joke or a deep cut homage if he was actually the one being given the assignment to explore the multiverse through the portal. I think that would tie better. That will be much funnier, I think. And we also see that Rappaport decided to get rid of his implant permanently. He's now fully organic. And they also hint at the possibility of Tandy and him hooking up. I think they probably didn't know it's the end of the series when they wrote this episode, since I think they should have went all out with these kinds of things. They should have actually shown them hooking up and not just implying it once again, since it's the end of the series and probably the last time we'll see them, unless they do some kind of live action version of the characters, which is kind of rumored, and I would enjoy that if it happens. Then they also have like a montage of all the other crew members across the episode, so that was nice as well. We see the Delta Shift, which was like a funny variant on our usual team, since they were kind of similar to them but different. And we see the guys in engineering who have a new Badgie helper working on a new triple version of the most important device in the universe. I once made a very long compilation of that prop being shown in so many different science fiction movies. We also see some crew members using the same kind of candle lamp that we saw in TNG. That was the one with the metaphasic life form that Beverly was hooking up with. That ghost creature came from such a candle light, and so that's a reference to that. And the episode ends with Ransom trying to decide how he should say his command to go to warp. And I'm getting so tired of this kind of scene because we saw it so many times in all the recent Star Trek shows. I think it started in Discovery, then in Picard, then in Strange New Worlds, and in Lower Decks we saw it before, that for some reason they decided that each captain should have his own unique phrase of how he says to go to warp, and they make a big deal out of it and make jokes out of it, and I'm getting so tired of seeing the same scene again and again and again. And Ransom decides to say, engage the core, because that's a fitness phrase, and he's so obsessed with fitness. So I guess it's funny, but I wish they would have ended the episode and the series with something a little bit more interesting and epic and funny, and not just some silly joke, which is a rehash of the same kind of joke scene that we saw at least 10 times in the last few years, and it's something that was never really a thing in the previous shows. So that's the end of the episode and the end of the series. And so, as I said, I did like the show for the most part, but also I'm not really sad it's ending, because I think I kind of had enough of all the references, even though they did it in a good way most of the time, in a funny way, in an interesting way, in a correct way. They were very faithful. They were trying to tie things together between the many different Star Trek shows. They were kind of bridging the gaps. They were kind of paying attention to the details and the visuals, and especially they were faithful to the TNG style, which I personally prefer. For example, the Klingons they showed were always the TNG Klingons, and I love that joke they did when they poked fun at the Discovery Klingons, and they didn't technically explain anything, so we can still come up with theories to explain all the contradictions, but they did kind of imply that all of Discovery is from some other different reality. And so, to summarize, This was a fun show, I did enjoy most of it, but I'm also kind of glad it's ending because I was kind of getting tired of the same kind of jokes again and again, and also I wish there would be more new ideas and more imagination and more actual new stories and new ideas, and that's what Star Trek really needs to do in any future show. They should stop relying on callbacks and member berries and rehashes of the same stories and same ideas, but instead finally do some new science fiction stories with new characters and not just remakes of the same ideas again and again. So that's what I'm hoping for in the future. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.